Okay, I'll be waiting for you, Pastor. Correct. Good afternoon, Pastor. It's a pleasure, as before. It's a pleasure once again to be with you on Christian Israel. Yes, it's absolutely so. The um, country is busy falling to pieces, falling apart. It's amazing how the present government is um, handing out uh, to the managers of these parastatals and also to large corporations, handing out massive bonuses. I'm talking about bonuses that exceed even those that the President of the United States is offered to themselves for achievements, and their achievements only being the dilapidated state of South Africa, and especially utilities like electricity, the municipalities, the ambulance services, the hospital services. It's just incredible how the hospital services have dilapidated from a situation where South Africa was one of the leading medical services provider in the world, with people even arriving from countries like Spain, France, just for medical treatment in the hospitals in South Africa. However, these hospitals have uh, totally, in some areas, totally fall into ruins because of mismanagement and nepotism. People being put in positions of management and especially in positions of authority that are totally unqualified to do so. It's just a total waste to see these things happening. Now, it's been happening for quite a number of years in terms of farming communities where farms have been taken away from their rightful owners over the past 350 years, 360 years, where whites have managed the farms. The farms have been in families, and if I say 360 years, it's down in the Cape Town area where that is the case, and of course in absolutely, and then also the Transvaal and the Free State, the republics of the Transvaal and Free State, which were the Boer republics, where the Boers established themselves as agricultural farmers and also livestock farmers, where these farms that have been in the families for generations, purely because there were no blacks in those areas, massive plains, massive areas, large tracts of lands where absolutely, and where there were no sign of any black resident blacks in that area. And I'm talking about absolute hundreds of kilometers in that area. It was total savanna grassland with no sign of any life other than animals and game. And These have been in obviously you have the same situation in America where there were people who for many years actually um, farmed. Now in South Africa, ever since well, this was evident even in the during the Afrikaner regime, the so-called apartheid regime time, the many farmers were disowned from their land by the then government, and that was how they actually set up these what was termed as Bantustans and also as homelands for the blacks, which of course would have developed into full-fledged self-governed black states like Bophuthatswana. Exactly. The strange thing, Pastor, the strange thing is they did not accept the black republics in South Africa because that would have set up the stage for the disintegration of the Union of South Africa, which of course was specifically set up by the Jews and the Freemasonry for the control of so many different black ethnic groups. I think there are in total 17 different black ethnic groups that are within the borders of South Africa. And that, of course, no, um, at the time there were black tribes, Tswanas, that lived in Botswana, and of course it became a British protectorate. Um, but the strange thing is they needed these black tribes in Botswana needed to be protected against the British. Now the British wanted to protect. They set up these so-called protectorates. That was, for example, Nyasaland, what was Rhodesia and Northern Rhodesia, Southern Rhodesia, as so-called protectorates. However, a country like Swaziland, which is a very small country, I mean, it's like a postage stamp sized country within totally surrounded by South Africa and Mozambique. That was, and also Lesotho, or the old Basotho land, was given independence by the British. However, those two states, and it must be seen in terms of the strategy point of view, the reason why those two states received their independence was purely for the purpose of cutting the Boer republics off from the seaports of Port Natal and Maputo. That was the main reason. The British wanted to isolate the Boers for the purpose of overrunning and overruling and taking control of the Boer republics. And to this day, so one must look at the strategy point of view as well. The British were so, and it needs to be clarified. I have nothing against the English. It is the British that I have a particular problem with. I have. That's correct. That's correct. Correct. Pastor, I've spoken to many black people over the past years, over the past 20 years, in various parts of the country. I'm a small businessman as well, entrepreneur, and I've managed and I've executed contracts for various corporations and also organizations over extended period of time. And I've met with blacks who actually stated and openly declared and stated, saying to me, "Sir, we had it better under apartheid than we are having it under our own people." I stopped at a traffic light. We call it a robot in South Africa, a traffic light, and this was in Centurion, a town which used to bear the name of Dr. Hendrik French Verwoerd. It was Verwoerdburg. And I stopped now. The vehicle that I drive, I'm a very a reserved kind of person. I don't splash out whatever I have. I don't drive in the latest and greatest and best of cars whenever I can. I like my exactly. Now, now, exactly. Now, my car was about 8 or 9 years old, and I stopped at a robot where a virtually a brand new Mercedes Benz was already stopped at this traffic light. In this Mercedes Benz was and it was something like a 450 SLC, and you can see this car most probably still reeked with newness, originality. And this black man that was a beggar, he came, stood waiting for me to actually stop, and I thought he was perhaps afraid that I would overrun the red robot or the red traffic light, and but he came directly to my window and he asked me if I could give him some money, and I asked him, "Why don't you ask the man in the Mercedes?" And he looked at me and he said to me, "Sir, my own people don't part with their money. They don't help the poor." Now, this I've seen exactly. Absolutely. That's correct. Now, it's a pity that it is so, but it's even worse so in South Africa because um, the black seem to think that they have elevated themselves to a financial position. However, this is totally out of what can you say? Totally out of relation to the truth, because blacks have taken the positions where productive whites used to sit and manage, and things were running seamless at the time. And one might even say that things were running to the point where South Africa was totally instead of a third world country, it was a first world country. We were developing systems, train managing systems, and I used to work for a company where we developed a fail-safe electronic train marshalling and train signaling system, and it was on par with British Railways. And we some of my friends were, for example, involved with developing systems for the Airbus aircraft. I myself, I was involved with the development of a highly specialized communication management system for fighter aircraft. And these systems have been sold to various air forces across the globe. I myself have provided training on these systems in quite a number of countries across the globe. However, those achievements have fallen into the state where those systems are even uh, very little development is taking place purely because it has become too expensive in South Africa. Firstly, a company, a business in South Africa must employ blacks by percentage. However, once the exactly. Now, one of the things that must be said is once you have a black man in a managerial position within a company, he calls the shots. You will never or very seldom find any other person, not an Indian, not a person of color. You will only find blacks employed from that point forward. The South African government or the black government has specified that the workplace must represent the demographics of the country. Now, if you walk into a shopping center like Pick and Pay, like Ackermans, like Woolworths in South Africa, all of these businesses are Jewish run. Checkers, Jewish run, Jewish owned. Now, if you look at the demography of the people working in the shop itself, it is totally unrepresentative of the true demographics. You will find, for example, I live here in Cape Town. There's a very large colored population of color. Um, I That's right. That's correct. And if you walk into any of these grocery stores, these massive stores, they only have people of color. There are no whites. So it does not even in the predominantly white suburbs, you will find that the people who are employed, no whites. It's only people of color or black people. And absolutely, absolutely. Um, um, yeah, and then also you will find that in managerial positions, the government insists that beyond 50% of the people in managerial position must be black. Now, this leads to a situation where people are not developed to become managers. They need to be appointed on the basis of the fact that they are black. And they might even be a family member of a cabinet minister or somebody very important in the local community of the governing party. So South Africa is totally an unnatural habitat habitat at the moment of banana republic individuals, people who have very little authority or sense of responsibility make ludicrous decisions that is not based on fact, that is not based on technical knowledge, that is not based on. It is merely a matter of things must be done in a certain way because so and so says so, and that person might be a family member of somebody in the governing party. Absolutely. No, no, absolutely so. In South Africa, for example, the government tussle is at the moment between the Zulus, which is a very predominant large tribe, and the Xhosas. Now, Nelson Mandela was a Xhosa who lived in the Transkei, the one of the black homelands that had full government, self rule, and um, the Zulus, whom did not have total self rule, but they were busy progressing towards a total self rule, and this is something which is very interesting in South Africa, which is supposed to be a democracy, which is led by the majority vote of the country, making provision for the minorities. The Boer people in South Africa is a totally unrepresented group, merely because the Afrikaners deny the Boers their existence. The Afrikaners are continuously trying to, they in fact, like you experienced when we arrived at the Blood River terrain, um, the Afrikaners had their flag flying over the terrain, and had it not been for my trained eye and the fact that I had been doing some specific research in the way in which the Afrikaners operate with their Freemasonry masters, had I not been researched this before, I would have not noticed that, and I would have been part of the hilarious Boers who come to a very solemn event, the 16th of December, the day of the vow, the day of their covenant with Yahweh. We would have been, now something that must also be said at this point is that all the Boer heritage sites, like you've seen, those that I had taken you to, all those sites are under the control of the Afrikaners. The Afrikaners being the descendants, absolutely, and that's correct, which is it's like. Uh, I, 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 I don't think there's anything anywhere else in the world which is so mind-boggling as the situation in South Africa. Like I mentioned before, that uh, there are about 17 black tribes that all have their unique language. They mostly a unique language, mostly unique tribalisms, their tribal heritage, etc. All exactly, ex- exactly. Now, um, all the different groups, tribes in the black tribes in South Africa are being catered for in Parliament, are being catered for in terms of the culture, except for the Boers. The Boers' heritage is held custody by the Afrikaners, whom want to dominate the Boers. And you also saw at the particular Irene concentration camp. Garden of Remembrance, how the evidence to the atrocities that were actually committed also by the Afrikaners, or the ancestors of the Afrikaners, the Cape Dutch, when they participated with the British. I don't say the English, I say the British. The British orchestrated a war against the Boers so that they could benefit and actually do a land grabbing, in spite of the Geneva Convention of 1878, which stated that no country can, by virtue of a war, lay claim to the land of the people that they fight against. Even if they should lose the war, the land has to go back to the people to whom it belongs. And this never happened. The British actually handed the Boer republics as the Union of South Africa back to the Afrikaners. Now, the Afrikaners were part and parcel of the fight, the war against the Boers. So it was a matter of the British handing the control of the country, the Boers republics, to their enemy, to the Boers' enemy. And those people, being Freemasons, have managed and administered the Boer republics for the British uh, all along the past 113 years. And if you look at the ANC government today, you will find that in very important positions, I don't want to call those positions or identify or name them at this time, but if you look at all those positions behind behind the curtains, behind the display windows, are the black people that actually sit in the front, and they are mere puppets of the people who pull the strings in the background. Those are still Afrikaners. They are super Afrikaners. They are identified, not Boers. That's right. That's correct. Mm. Well, that's also true. I know of many blacks who have left the country purely because it has become that they love to move into what used to be very exclusive white areas. They actually infiltrate those areas and come and live there. If I must be honest with you, where I live in what used to be a rather predominantly, no, it was a total white area 20 years ago. And over the past 20 years, just over 20 years since the collapse of apartheid, the area has become uh, the place of or the area of choice, especially for colored people. Just about all my neighbors are colored, people of color. Or mixed race. Opposite from where I live, it's a Hollander Dutchman with his wife is a colored lady, and on the one side it's a couple that are colored, and on the other side a British man with a lady of, or his wife is a woman of color. So I'm fully surrounded virtually by this situation, and every time I see this, I feel I can actually bite off my own wrists, purely because it is so frustrating. It's so frustrating to see how these people are busy um, gaining in numbers. You know, a white and a white produces a white. A white and a black produces a person of color. A black and a black produces a black. But once you have whites and blacks contributing to a pool of colored people, and the coloreds producing themselves by much faster than whites can reproduce, you find a situation where purely by virtue of what the future holds for the white people in South Africa, you can see we're on a path of extermination. Um, and the Jews are, it's absolutely. And what even propagates this further is in terms of the Boers, the Afrikaners who are also whites and people of, I must add this, the Afrikaners wish to see themselves as a white race only. However, uh, many of the hundreds of thousands of the people of color in the Cape, in the Cape province, now that is where they predominantly stay and live in South Africa, they see themselves also as Afrikaners. So does some of the Bushmen who speak Afrikaans. They see themselves as Afrikaners. Exactly. Now the Afrikaners live in this dreamland that they are all the Afrikaners are white, and for this reason, they seem to want to drag they want to drag the Boers into a single grouping with themselves. Now the Boers have been different all along, ever since their landing and their arrival in the Cape of Good Hope. That is where it actually got its name, as Cape of Good Hope. the Cape of Good Hope was a place of refuge for those people of German and Prussian origin who came for a new life, to start a new life in South Africa, or in at the southern tip of Africa. They did not call it South Africa at the time. It was known as the Cape of Good Hope. And there are distinct differences between what the Dutch who came here and the free burghers who came from Germany at the time. And that's correct. Uh, mm, yes, absolutely. Right. Yeah. Pastor, in fact, there are so-called, in South Africa, you have so-called leftist white Afrikaners and then rightist white Afrikaners. I specifically say white Afrikaners because Afrikaners are not just white, they are also people of color. I personally saw a man from Soweto, which is the acronym, and it's also uh, the largest portion of Johannesburg today, which used to be a little shanty town um, where I just want to get the right word, where migrating mine workers, black mine workers from Lesotho and Botswana, where they would come and live in the southwest. That's right. And it got the name of Soweto from southwestern townships. And where a black man from the southwestern townships of Johannesburg is the total black, but he speaks Afrikaans very well, and he called himself. They had him on South African TV of an Afrikaner organization called Solidarity. Now, this organization loves to. They embellish themselves with the idea of propagating the image of the Boer, even the Boer's heritage, even the Boer's traditions, etc. But they do it with the purpose of hijacking the Boer's um, identity to to eradicate the Boer, to make the Afrikaner the Boer in not the distant future, exactly like the Khazar Jews did with the Khazars did it with the Jews about what was it, 467 years before Christ. There was an earlier group. I read that there was an earlier group that actually came in, and because of what they achieved, the rest of the group or Khazars came in 470 AD. Um, but absolutely, Pastor. Genocide, as it is defined by the Genocide Watch, and also the Manifest on Genocide of the United Nations, you will find that genocide consists not merely of the killing off of a particular people of a particular race, but genocide can also be based on the disacknowledgement or the uh, marginalization by dis. Absolutely. If you look at all those things, that then you can say that the Afrikaners have virtually, and language, but the Afrikaners have managed to virtually totally eradicate Boer people from this planet. Even the Boers, The Boers don't even know that they are Boers because they have Afrikanerized or become Afrikanerized to such an extent that they don't even know what the difference between an Afrikaner and a Boer is. And it's a fight or battle that I'm fighting daily on Facebook, where I even get accursed by Afrikaners who are trying to. Yes, absolutely. Exactly. Absolutely, Pastor. Uh, no doubt about it. Um, and that is and that is why we are in particular in the crosshairs of they are aiming at us all the time, but they cannot face us themselves, so they make use of all these others, these people without conscience, the Muslims, the blacks, who can for example um, like like Winnie Mandela did, even just before the 1994 elections and the handover of power by the whites, the Afrikaners, to the white Freemasons of South Africa under the Afrikaners, or the Afrikaners under the Freemasons, handing over the power to the black Freemason Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela's wife, Winnie Mandela, was found guilty. She was tried and found guilty of being the orchestrator or the instigator of putting motor car tires around the necks of people who did not support, and pouring petrol over them and actually burning them alive. And there are so many of these black people who have such a or had such a fear of the ANC at the time that they voted for the ANC for fear of retribution, of having their families burned alive and their houses burned with the people inside. Exactly. Uh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's correct. It's dictated by a so-called black empowerment, black equity empowerment laws. Now, quite a number of my friends, I run a small business. I was in a particular area on the east of Johannesburg where I had quite a number of friends who were all running their own small businesses, and quite a number of these friends of mine, they embraced this concept of black empowerment or the black equity empowerment, where they actually appointed black managers into their business. Even though it is a small one-man business, they saw themselves fit in order to become eligible for governmental contracts. They had to appoint a black member to their business, or a black manager to their business. Now, within three years, um, more than half of those friends of mine have lost their businesses totally, purely because like one of my friends said to me, he had to appoint this black man. He had to pay him a salary which was dictated by this black man. This black man also insisted on a motor car because he knew he was being put into a position of management. He had to have a motor car. He wanted all the perks, including, for example, a credit card which was open and now this particular pattern was set way back, I would say around about 1997, 1998, 1999. And within 3 years, most of those friends of mine who walked that avenue had to have themselves liquidated because their businesses could not afford this black man who would sit in his office or go on a Kentucky Fried Chicken lunch every day, pay the lunch with his credit card, or even take friends and family on lunches. And he didn't bring in one contract. He would not bring in any work. He would not even have the knowledge of collecting the spanners in the workshop at the end of the day. Now, large corporations. I worked for a very large a corporation in South Africa, electronic company, who was bought out totally by a company in Europe. And I must say that this particular company and the country from which this company is was very supportive of the ANC in the days that they were isolated. In fact, that they were banned from South Africa. The ANC was banned during a period of time because of terrorism. But this particular country financially supported the ANC to a very large degree. And of course, one of the first things that the ANC did was, when they came to power, was to actually buy an enormous amount of military hardware. And this particular company and country then got a major portion of these contracts to supply this equipment. Now, this equipment, most of this equipment today has become not obsolete because of it being aged. It has become obsolete purely because of lack of control. One submarine has been taken on a dive in a place where it could not dive, purely because the black commander of the submarine said dive, and the one of the naval men on board was a white man. He said, "Commander, we cannot dive. We're too shallow. This is not area where we can dive." And the commander said to him, "I dictate the when this ship should be handled and where it should go. It must dive." And of course, they nearly and there was millions of rands of damage to this submarine, purely because the commander of the submarine was a black man, and he insisted that it should dive. Now, I can tell you horror stories like this on just about every facet of the frigates, the frigates that were purchased from Germany. Excellent naval vessels, beautiful. They fit perfect in the role for which they were initially intended. However, events have taken actual stupidity. Have taken these very expensive pieces of equipment, military hardware, and have made them unserviceable purely because of black economic empowerment. The same goes for helicopters. Absolutely, black incompetence has and if one now goes and looks for example at the aircraft that were purchased. I'm talking about fighter aircraft, the latest fourth generation fighter planes with mechanisms and systems on board that many countries can only dream of. These planes are standing wasted in sheds because the white pilots that are capable of flying them have been isolated from the South African Air Force because of the fact that they are white. And quite a number of aircraft have been flown into smithereens purely because of black incompetence. For example, one particular black took a South African Air Force a trainer plane, and he was on training, or he was in training, had not passed one of his exams yet, but he took one of these aircraft, took off from the airport where he was stationed, and went for a flip around the area where he came from, and he actually crashed the plane, a literal flip. And um, exactly, exactly. Yeah. Mm. Yes. Um, Absolutely, Pastor. In fact, the previous government, being the well, the way in which they treated it was there was a hospital or a clinic in every small community scattered around South Africa now. Even being perhaps I should state this, that the largest hospital in the southern hemisphere was built in by the previous government, the Afrikaner government, was built in this southwestern townships, the Soweto Black Township of Johannesburg, for the blacks. It is also it's also the best equipped hospital in the southern hemisphere. It was also the best equipped hospital for burn people in, for example, in the mines. Well, it was the best equipped, but it was absolutely. I saw statistics the other day that stated that they, during the 40, well, since 1948 up to 1994, a total of, I think, 22,000 blacks had lost their lives while in police custody or because of action against terrorists, but a total of 22,000. If you consider, for example, that within the first 3 months of the number of blacks and whites that had lost their lives within the first 3 months after the ANC came to power actually extended beyond those 22,000. If you look at the total number of whites daily in South Africa at this present time, with the black government, with the ANC government, more people die in South Africa because of murders and uh, 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 um, and and unnatural deaths in South Africa than there are people dying in for example in uh, the war that was in Iraq, or the war that was in Syria. More people, absolutely. Absolutely, with a president that even sings, "Bring me my machine gun, let's shoot the Boers." Kill the Boers, kill the farmers, or kill the farmer, kill the Boer. Um, yeah, 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 absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Pastor, I think there's some conspiracy between the government and these large corporations. In order for those whites to be in those positions, they ensure that everybody else in that corporation or that particular restaurant's employ would be blacks. And you take, for example, in a place like Cape Town, it's amazing how many Zimbabweans are resident in Cape Town. I think at the moment there are more Zimbabweans, Malawians, Nigerians, and even Sudanese, Ethiopians in this particular area in Cape Town than there are resident blacks from Zululand or Xhosas or whatever. But it just comes to show that uh, somewhere something is terribly wrong in terms of the management of the country. Um, it's at this stage it is estimated that approximately 12 million foreigners are in South Africa illegally. Exactly, and they absolutely. That's exactly what is the situation, Pastor. Pastor, what I would like to end up with is end off with is that it's amazing how under Freemasonry the country was initially developed as a super first world organized country, and then under Freemasonry it is managed down to the point where it is currently totally busy falling to pieces. There must be something sinister in the background, an agenda to which they are working. Exactly. Right, Pastor. Excellent. Thanks very much, Pastor. Yahweh bless you. Amen.